All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our first Sunday deep dive of the year for this session of the Modjeska Simkins School of Human Rights. I am, of course, Dr. Robert Green II, the lead instructor for the school. And today I am pleased to welcome up to the front here Brett Bursey and Professor Chris Judge. I'm going to do a quick little ceremony, so to speak, to get our Indigenous deep dive underway this afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Green.
Thank you, Dr. Green.
I had the privilege of living on some land here in South Carolina that the natives lived on for thousands of years before I got it. But one of the things I've acquired over the years is something that was given to me by someone that worked with me at Grow. I'm out of the frame. He's learning to get people in the frame. And so this is something that was made by Sarah Ayers. It's Catawba pottery, and Sarah Ayers was probably one of the last really famous living.
One of the masters of the 20th century.
The masters of the 20th century, pretty impressive. And so this is probably more valuable than it deserves to live on a bookshelf at my house for the last 50 years, and was given to me by somebody that is a very unusual person that deserves at least a few minutes of acknowledgement. Wesley Tuchure is his Indian name. Wesley White was somebody that started working with us at Grow in the late 70s. And Wesley is probably one of the more eccentric people that anyone that's ever spent time with him has met. Long beard, generally wears breastplates with moss hanging on them, barefooted. And he earned the title Moss Man in Columbia, South Carolina. And he was working at Grow and would do things like hide these maps he makes underneath the rug so they stay flat. And he would type on a manual typewriter with one finger. And I told him one time, I said, Moss Man, you know you could type faster if you use both hands. And he looked at me and he said, I only do it once. So he was very thorough. And when I started getting phone calls from the Smithsonian Institute asking for him, it became clear that his depth of understanding of Native cultures was deeper than mine. And so Chris knows him, but I wanted to present this drum, the Sarah Ayers drum, to the South Carolina Native American Resource Center that Chris is the associate director, but it sounds like he's really running the joint.
I'm associate director.
Yeah. So Chris, speak to that and take care of it.
Yeah.
It's on your head now. And I brought this special carrying case made out of cardboard over there.
For those who were here last time know that I mentioned that some of the oldest handmade Indian pottery in the United States was made right here in South Carolina. And we believe it to be a continuous folk tradition handed down from one generation to the next, to the present. And Sarah Ayers and Fox Ayers, who lived here in West Columbia, were two very, very fine potters. And I am pleased to have this drum. Thank you, Brett. We'll put it back in the bucket. Welcome everybody out in Zoom and here. Good to see everybody. Saw a number of you yesterday up at the State House singing songs, carrying signs, and got to hear Robert Green talk from the State House steps. Let me share my screen real quick. Today we're going to do a deep dive, and brought a couple other folks with me today. Brett actually invited them. Lilly Little Water is here, and Jay Bender is here. Brett asked me to talk a little bit about modern stuff that we're doing at the Native American Studies Center, and then we'll get Jay Bender to come up and talk about his work with the Catawba Treaty and getting their land back after many years. And then Lilly Little Water was going to talk about some modern problems facing Indian communities, in particular facing Native women in Indian communities. I want to talk a little bit about the Native American Studies Center, where this beautiful drum will be next week. We are located on the traditional lands of the Catawba and the Chiraw, the Watery, the Catappa, the Esau, and the Sugary, and the Wax on our campus. We did do a land acknowledgement back when these were vogue. I'm not sure how important these are anymore, but a lot of universities and a lot of places are acknowledging where they work, where they live, were once native lands, and so we do have a acknowledgement for our campus. We opened in 2012, 15,000 square foot facility dedicated to researching Native Americans in South Carolina from the perspective of archaeology, art, archives, linguistics, history, and folklore. And we are free and open every day of the week, but Monday and Sunday, that's not every day, Tuesday through Saturday, and I encourage you to come and visit us. We're trying to dispel a lot of the stereotypes about Native Americans. I talked about this last time. And there are so many misconceptions regarding Native Americans. I was with a very important, high-ranking university official recently who asked me what tribe I was. So there's a stereotype we have to get. I'm the Celtic tribe of Ireland. There's our faculty up on top and our staff at the Native American Studies Center. We've got beautiful galleries. We have 6 galleries. We have one permanent one to Catawba pottery, its whole story and how it gets started, how it's made. And the other 5 galleries rotate on a 6-month to 12-month basis. So if you've been to see us before and it's been about a year, we probably have 5 new exhibits for you to come and enjoy. My own research is in the late prehistoric period, particularly in the Watery and the Great PD River valleys. This is Adamson Mound near Camden, an artificial construct.
Where is that?
This is just west of the town of Camden on the Watery River. And there we're doing some gradiometer. You see Chet Walker, my colleague, he's got a device that looks at the magnetic field of the earth. If it's been altered or if clay is burned, you get a signature. And the red squares that you see are what he believes are structures under the ground using the gradiometer. The grayscale is pottery. The large mound is right here in the center. I should probably use my cursor. Here's the large mound here in the center. This is the heaviest concentration of pottery. And we're able to kind of identify things, but not destroy them, which is what Native Americans want us to be less intrusive in our investigations. This is an artist's rendition of what this site may have looked like at one time. This was done for the Liberty Trail. It's a driving tour of Revolutionary War sites. And Fort Watson on Lake Marion is one of these mounds. And so I worked with an artist based on my archaeological knowledge. He draws what one of these villages may have looked like. And this resulted in a exhibit in our Duke Energy Gallery up at the center back in August. We have lots of exhibits. This one is on the Spanish explorers who contacted these late prehistoric societies in the 16th century. We are encouraging the state-recognized tribes to take one of our galleries and do their own exhibit. Pick the objects, write the text, tell their story. We provide them whatever they might need, but these are exhibits where they're telling their own story. This is the Sumter Band of the Cheraw showing some of their regalia. Each year in November, we do a Native American Studies Month. A couple years ago, we did STEAM. Last year, we did music. This coming year, we're going to celebrate the 20th anniversary of our program. And so get involved in that. We have a quarterly newsletter. We just have one out. If you want to get that, just get me your email and I'll make sure you get that. Tell them what we're up to as a faculty and what programs and events we have coming up that we'd love for you to come and join with us. This is Brittany Taylor, our artist. If you've been to the center and seen the beautiful displays and everything in there, that's through her eye and through her vision. We recently were able to install moving shelves in our special collections, which doubles the amount of space we have to store things like the beautiful drum that Brent just gave me. Claudia Heinemann Priest in the white in the center is our linguist, and she works on the Catawba language. One of the more important projects I think that she's done is working with the Head Start kids on the Catawba Nation. They teach them the Catawba folk tales in both English and Catawba and after school program. We have a lot of times during the year where we'll have Native Americans presenting their art or singing or dancing, as we see here. We do 2 art sales a year. We do one in May as part of Red Rose Festival, which is a large downtown festival in Lancaster. And then we do one the first Saturday in December, as part of the downtown Christmas market. So if you want a unique Christmas present, usually have 12 to 15 native artists on the center on those days. There's First Lady of USC, who visited us this year in January, and then on the left is our new dean. We do a monthly lunch and learn lecture series on the fourth Friday of the month at noon. You can come and see it in person. You can join by Zoom, or by Wednesday of the next week, they will appear on our YouTube channel. We do about 6 Native American topics a year, and we do 6 regional history, often non-Native American. Dr. Stephen Criswell, who's our director, has been very successful in Arts Commission grants. Artists to the Native American Studies. They will set up somewhere in the center of their choosing. We'll set up chairs. You can come and sit with them for 5 minutes or 5 hours as they do their work. And that's Keith Littlebear Brown on the left doing pottery, and then Becky Garrison red, and Faith Griner. Faith, who's sitting down, is basketry back in the 1950s, and she's sharing that folk craft with Becky, who's an elder in the Catawba Nation, but who works for us at the center. So we are on YouTube. We've got all kinds of great lectures on there. And if we interview anybody or have any kind of event, we'll often film it and put it on this really cool tool called YouTube. Stephen got a great racial justice grant. He's working on the Low Country tribes, trying to capture any kind of folk traditions that they do and find out what they're doing in the modern world. And we have a current exhibit on that in the center. We try to get out every chance we can and promote the mission. Sun City is a senior community near us, and so we've gone up and given classes at the Sun City, or at our Indian Land campus, trying to attract hired folks to come and join us in the learning process. We have a great archives. It's named for Brent Bergen, who passed away a few years ago at ALS. He was our archivist. We got mainly Catawba and Cherokee, but we are collecting the 8 state recognized tribes as best we can. We have photographs, old films, books, manuscripts, lots of documents in the archive. This is the Edisto coming and visiting our archive and working on their federal recognition petition and seeing what they might find in our archive that they don't have elsewhere. We tried to get Dr. Evan Noe to be part of Simpson School this year. We might get him next year. He's won a couple awards for a great book called Aggressions and Sufferings, Settler Violence and Native Resistance and Coalitions in the Old South. And he's been out on the book tour promoting that book. He's our historian, of course. It's a young Catawba artist, Alex Osborne. And when we were designing a iCarolina lab, which is a computer lab that both students and members of the community can use free of charge, Alex drew on the walls. A lot of places you get in trouble for doing that, but I think he got paid. Here's the craft sales. We usually have the artist going on. We usually have dancing or drumming or storytelling or some kind of program that goes along with it. This is a hoop dancer. She's only got 2 there, but she'll get about 6 or 7, 8 hula hoops going, kind of weaving in and out. It's a very, very cool thing to see. I don't know how they do it, but that's a traditional Native American hoop dance. K-12 visitation has dropped off post-COVID. We understand that there's not a lot of money for the yellow buses to get rolling and bring them to us. We're in the process of figuring out how we're going to go take it to the classroom and work with the kids there. A few years ago, USC gave us a very sizable grant to work with digital libraries at Thomas Cooper, the history department's Institute for Southern Studies, to develop a Native American archive. So we have interviews, letters, images, videos, interactive timeline maps and different things about the Native communities in South Carolina. It's a great resource. Now I'm not on Facebook or any of these social media things, but apparently it's a really good way to get in touch with people. So we are all the different things that you could name, even Yelp. We have found that there's something called Reels. I guess it's America's answer to TikTok. Where you do these short little things. Some of them are serious and some of them are meant to be humorous, trying to attract people to come and see us. We had a cool event a few years ago. At our graduation, there's Harris Pastides, who was president then. We had invited Bill Harris. He's the long hair that kind of looks like he could be a brother of another mother of me, on the far right there. He was our commencement speaker. And that's the first time we think an Indigenous person has done that. in South Carolina. So come see us at the Native American Studies Center. We'd love to have you. We're raising money right now.
Nice pitch.
For Give Garnett, give Chris Judge a high five. You give $5, I'll donate $5. All right. Thank you.
Chris, explain this, what you're doing with this money that you're taking out, and why aren't you getting it from the university?
Okay, so the way we're funded is the 6 faculty are paid to teach classes. I have a 4-4 contract. I teach 4 in the spring, 4 in the fall. We have gotten grants from the city, from the county, from various places to help run it. But we are trying to raise 5 endowments. And one endowment is the Fred Henry Shute Archaeology Lab endowment. He was my first lab volunteer when we started in 2012. We unfortunately watched as he developed Alzheimer's and passed away. And so his wife gave a donation, started that fund. And we'd like to get to the point where we could bleed off interest off of the endowments to fund. So we have an archives fund, archaeology lab fund. We have a general fund for the whole program. We have a lunch and learn fund. We bring in a speaker once a year from far away to speak, and we have the money to allow us to do that. So we're trying to raise a bit of our own money.
But you get to decide how that money that is donated through your division is spent.
That's correct. Yeah.
Because I've had to convince friends that were alumni that this is not something that's going to end up with the Alumni Association.
No, this is,
Thank you.
you could also donate to them, but no.
And Modjeska Simkins gave him $100 for you people.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh,
Follow up on that.
All right. So we have 2 very interesting folks with us today. I'll introduce first Jay Bender. Jay, Columbus of South Carolina, got a 1970 BA in journalism, I believe, Juris Doctorate in 1975. Has taught, I think, in both the law school and the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Is that right, Ernie?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
He's been the attorney for the South Carolina Press Association until very recently. I think there might be a story there. But he's someone who has worked really hard on First Amendment rights, free speech rights during his career.
Mine included.
Brett's included. And but from I think it was 1975 to 2006, he worked on a really interesting project to return traditional Catawba lands to the Catawba, which were basically taken in 1840, and I think they came back to the tribe in the early 1990s. So Jay, I'm going to give the floor to you. Give him a hand. Come on up and that's good.
And Brett, thank you for that significant gift of pottery to a place that'll treasure it. There is a rich pottery tradition at Catawba. Many of you have heard about the slave potters in South Carolina over in Edgefield. It's gotten national attention more recently because of a display of slave pots that has traveled the country. And I was in Boston a couple of years ago, and I went to the Boston Museum to see the slave pottery exhibit. And the first pot in the exhibit was an Earl Robbins Catawba pot. Earl is one of the, well, he's now deceased, foremost Catawba potteries. And his pot was there to demonstrate the link between the imagery on Catawba pots and the imagery on slave pots in South Carolina. And if you see some of Earl's work, you will see wavy lines. And the slave potters interpreted that as the ocean on their voyage from Africa and incorporated it. Go up to see Chris's program. It's spectacular. The Catawba Cultural Center has exhibits during the year, but let's talk about history. And because I am a lawyer and I'm a retired professor, I will speak for 50 minutes and give an exam. That's not part of the program.
15 minutes or so?
European invaders showed up on the coast of North America and they were shocked because they were lost. They thought they were in India. Yeah, but get that out of here. I don't want to picture the guy on the left. That was me. They thought they were in India. Now, we do have Indians in South Carolina. Nikki Haley was an Indian, a subcontinent Indian. So those are different people. So let's talk about natives. And they, for the most part, do not mind being called Indians. The official name of Catawba is the Catawba Indian Nation. But these Europeans showed up and they were outnumbered, but they had an ally that the natives could not combat. They had smallpox and they decimated native populations. But in time, the Europeans needed natives. You've all heard the first Thanksgiving myth. Whether any of that's true or not, I don't know. But I do know that when the British were in the South Carolina colony, they had a little disagreement with natives to the north and west, the Cherokees. And they enticed the Catawba to be on their side against the Cherokee. And as a reward for their loyalty to the crown gave in 1760 a reservation to the Catawba, 144,000 acres. It's 15 miles on a side. You can locate where that is by looking at a road map of South Carolina. Where I-77 crosses into North Carolina, you will see a couple of right angles in the border between North Carolina and South Carolina. Those are angles on the 1760 and 1763 reservation created by two treaties between the tribe and Catawba. Now, the myth is that the reason Catawba is in South Carolina and not extending into North Carolina where its Aboriginal territory included is that the then colonial governor of North Carolina did not like King Hagler, who was the chief of Catawba, because he was always asking for guns and blankets. So the North Carolina governor insisted that Catawba remain in the South Carolina colony, hence that strange shape on the border between the two states. When the United States was created after the Revolutionary War, we had a Confederate government, not those white supremacists who started that nonsense in 1861, but a confederation. And 13 colonies became states, but there was no cohesion. Each could have its own money, each could have its own tariffs, each could have its own foreign policy. Hence the Constitutional Convention. But in both the Articles of Confederation and in the Constitution of the United States, there is a provision that only Congress has the authority to deal with native tribes. It's in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. If you want to pull your pocket copy out and take a look at it. And it gives Congress the exclusive power to deal with foreign nations and the Indian tribes. And from colonial days, Indian tribes were treated as foreign sovereign governments. Hence the treaties between the colonial governments in South Carolina and throughout the country and the tribes. In 1840, the state of South Carolina decided to relocate the Catawbas from their treaty reservation. And they entered into a new agreement, another treaty, if you would, the Treaty of Nations Ford. If you drive up 77, you will see a Nations Ford exit off of 77. One of the treaties between the king and Catawba was the Treaty of Pine Tree Hill. Pine Tree Hill Elementary School in Camden is in the area where that treaty was developed. So South Carolina in 1840 decided to move the Catawba. And it entered into this treaty and it said, we will give you suitable land in Haywood County, North Carolina. Well, if you know anything about fraud, you would know that that was fraudulent from the get-go. Because in 1838, our genocidal president, Andrew Jackson, rounded up every native he could find and walked them out west on the Trail of Tears. That's why if you drive through Oklahoma today, you will see the Cherokee Nation, you will see the Sac and Fox Nation, you will see the Kickapoo Nation. It's because Andrew Jackson wanted the natives out of the way so he could have land development. Not that there's a parallel to Gaza, but you might consider it. So South Carolina, being South Carolina, did not get the approval of the federal government to move the Catawba. But they were displaced and they roamed around for a couple of years, homeless. And then the state of South Carolina, being magnanimous, as it always is to people who aren't white, it bought a 630-acre farm down near Leslie, South Carolina, and said, okay, this is your new reservation. Now, the 630 acres was in the middle of the 144,000 acres that the state stole. But they were good guys and they gave this back. In the 1940s, there became an awareness that Southern tribes were being impoverished by federal government policies. And so the federal government stepped in and purchased about 2,000 acres to expand this 630-acre reservation. It was better than 630 acres, but it had a problem. If you were living on that, you did not own the land and you couldn't get a mortgage and you couldn't build a house. Institutionalized impoverization of a population is what it was. So the Eisenhower administration rolls around and its policy was to terminate the federal trust relationship between tribes and the United States government. Now, we're going to hear about state tribes. There are two levels of recognition of tribes. Now, I don't think tribes need any governmental recognition because tribes exist because they are tribes and they've been tribes since time immemorial. But because we have a structure, if you have a tribe with a federal status, the federal government operates as the trustee for the tribal lands and tribal resources. In many areas, they steal it, but that's the relationship. Well, a congressman from South Carolina, Robert Hemphill, introduced legislation he said would help the tribe. And this legislation would allow tribal members to gain ownership of parts of that 2,000-acre expanded reservation. And they could get mortgages, they could build houses, and if they wanted, they could sell the land because the trust relationship had been ended. As part of the promise made in connection with that legislation, the tribe's land claim, which had existed since 1840, was not to be extinguished or terminated, to use the legal language the Eisenhower administration had started using. Some of you may have heard of the American Indian Movement. A group of members of AIM occupied the Bureau of Indian Affairs office in Washington for several weeks. And while there, they went through the files on the tribes. And some of those folks showed up in York County, South Carolina, with a footlocker full of documents that had been copied from Bureau of Indian Affairs files. Significant in the documents was a report from a BIA representative who wrote a memo that said, this act that is proposed by Hemphill will disadvantage the tribe. Well, the head of the BIA decided to ignore that and testified in Congress that this legislation would benefit the tribe. So the tribe had known for years that it had a potential land claim. And the Native American Rights Fund had worked with Eastern tribes to develop strategies to pursue land claims in court. And in 1975, Don Miller, who was one of the NARF lawyers from Boulder, Colorado, came to South Carolina looking for local counsel to join in litigation to recover the tribe's land. Miller called around and set up an interview with lawyers who had civil rights litigation experience, including Gene Toll. I was Gene's book carrier at the time. I was the very youngest associate in the firm, although Toll and I are the same age. I had a circuitous route to get to law school. Miller told me later that he thought when he talked with Toll on the phone, he was talking with a 6-foot-tall black woman. Toll is about that tall and white. But it turned out when I met Miller, his roommate at the University of Colorado for undergraduate school was a guy I had grown up with in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So we all hit it off right away and we started litigation. And I continued to represent the tribe after Toll found other work on the Supreme Court. And I represented the tribe up until 2006 when I went to teach at the university. And Chris is correct. I was on the faculty at 2 schools because neither wanted me full time.
Untrue.
I wear this as an acknowledgement of my New Mexico heritage. I am not native, but I have a home in New Mexico that's located between 2 pueblos. And I understand the sovereignty of tribes. During COVID, the tribes closed their borders because they were a hell of a lot more sensitive to the risk of COVID than were the honkies who surrounded them. I drove out to New Mexico one time and I swore that there was a law that had been passed that said that white people could not wear masks because in South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Texas, Black people wore masks. And I wore a mask because I understand the infections. But the white people didn't. You get to New Mexico and there's a sign over the road that says, "This is serious shit, folks. Pay attention, get vaccinated." And the gas stations had guards at the doors. If you didn't have a mask on, you didn't get in. Now, all those yahoos in southeastern New Mexico who think they're Texans had a real hard time dealing with that. And the governor of New Mexico was being considered as a possible vice presidential candidate for Joe Biden. And so she was being interviewed, getting a lot of national press, and she went on the air to talk about the response to COVID in New Mexico. And she said, "We have worked very closely with our sovereign partners to deal with this." There were only about 6 people east of the Mississippi who understood what the hell she was talking about. The tribes are all sovereign entities, they're nations, and they have rights. Now, because our government has been run by white people since forever, the job of Congress and the BIA over the years has been to keep the boot heel on the necks of tribes. And that was very apparent when we tried to settle the Catawba land claim. The state of South Carolina had representatives that wanted to tell the tribes who their members could be. That the tribes said, "No, thank you. We're going to tell you who our members are." They didn't want the tribe to have any economic development opportunity. But fortunately, Crawford Clarkson, who at the time was the head of the Department of Revenue in the state, was the state's chief negotiator. And he recognized that the tribe would be perpetually disadvantaged if it did not have a source of revenue. And he proposed bingo, a high stakes bingo game for the tribe. Interestingly enough, the majority of members on the tribal executive committee were Mormon and opposed to gaming. But over time, they came to see that a bingo parlor might provide some opportunity. And Crawford Clarkson structured it so the tribe would have a bingo game that was so attractive, it would put the shady charity bingos out of business. And it worked until the shady charity bingo people got members of the legislature to keep bumping up what they could offer. And then the state of South Carolina killed bingo entirely by getting in the gaming business with the lottery. So the tribe was looking to have an enhanced bingo operation that would look like a casino. And we had the approval of everybody in the South Carolina congressional delegation, including Lindsey Graham. The Orangeburg County Council, the Clarendon County Council, the Town Council in Santee, everybody signed off on this. There was going to be a facility at the intersection of I-95 and I-26 in the town of Santee, and it was going to take over a defunct strip mall. It was going to provide jobs. It was going to provide opportunities in the area. The governor at the time was Marky Mark Sanford. And he told me to my face that he was opposed to it on moral grounds. Now, mind you, this is a guy who took money from the state of South Carolina to fly down to Buenos Aires and have an adulterous relationship with someone down there. Well, he had his staff lie to say he was on the Appalachian Trail. To kill the legislation, Sanford got his buddy John Ensign, who was a senator from Nevada, whose family owned casinos, to kill the legislation. And it was right at the end of the term, and so there was no way to get it renewed. Ensign, by the way, paid his chief of staff $600,000 to settle a claim that Ensign was having an affair with the chief of staff's wife. So Catawba's gaming enterprise is now in North Carolina because of the morality of Mark Sanford and his co-adulterer, John Ensign. Now, what were the legal issues? Did that legislation Bob Hemphill introduced terminate the tribe's status with the federal government? If it was a termination act, there was no land claim. All the South Carolina federal judges were recused in the case. And I don't know who engineered this judge from Erie, Pennsylvania, to come down here to hear the cases. His name was Joseph P. Wilson. Wilson had been Dwight Eisenhower's third judicial nominee after the 1952 election, because he had been Eisenhower's campaign manager for Western Pennsylvania. And he made it very clear the first day he met with us that he did not like Indians and he did not like lawyers who represented Indians. And he was faithful to that commitment all the way through. So we lost at the district court. We appealed to the Fourth Circuit and won. And then went to the Supreme Court. The state got cert, it went to the Supreme Court, and the tribe sort of won. That's the Supreme Court. And it came back to the Fourth Circuit. And you've seen this fellow who was a Republican who has been very critical of Trump's coup attempt in after the 2000 election. Michael Ludig. Ludig was a new judge on the Fourth Circuit. I swear he looked like he was 12 years old. I don't recognize this Ludig that shows up on television because he looks almost as old as me. But the Fourth Circuit said, if you could not prove that you had a continuous title and occupancy of the land in the claim area for 20 years, the tribe had a right to the land. You were a trespasser. South Carolina has a distinctive adverse possession law. In other states, if I have a piece of land I'm trying to adversely take, I meet certain criteria, I'm on it, I fence it, I pay taxes on it, I control it, I don't let anybody else on. But then I sell it at the end of those 10 years. In other states, the next person gets to tack their adverse possession on to the first adverse possession. Not in South Carolina. There is no tacking. So because this area south of Charlotte was growing quite rapidly, there was a lot of turnover and ownership of land. So there were only about 42,000 defendants when we identified who the defendants would be in the lawsuit. You start a lawsuit with a summons and you list the parties. And ours was Catawba Indian Nation versus 42,000 names. Usually a summons is one page. Our summons in this case was like that. I used it for a doorstop for years after we settled the case. Crawford Clarkson got involved on behalf of the state because he was an accountant and apparently the only guy who ever read the state's financial reports. And he said, I don't want to put words in Crawford's mouth. He's not here to defend himself. But I think what he said was, oh shit, we've got all of these potential financial disasters on the horizon that we haven't accounted for, including this notion of a land claim by the Catawba Indian tribe. So with that awareness, Crawford ended up being the state's chief negotiator. Had it not been for him and for John Spratt, the congressman from the area who recently died, we would have had to litigate for years and years and years, putting the 42,000 defendants at some disadvantage, because when you start a case involving title to land, you file a document called a lis pendens, which puts the world on notice that this land is subject to litigation. And you might not want to lend money on it. You might not want to buy it. The clerks of court in Lancaster, Chester, and York counties, where the claim area was, were ecstatic when I walked in with a lis pendens with 42,000 defendants, because they thought they got $5 per defendant. I said, no, the law says you have to file each lis pendens and you get $5. It doesn't matter how many defendants are on it. So, I was not entirely popular in some of those places. Did I care? No. But the relationship between the Catawba tribe and the state of South Carolina from 1840 on has been one where at every opportunity, the state has sought to diminish the authority, the resources, and even the tribe itself. The tribe, after our land claim settlement, and it took federal and state legislation to settle the claim, the tribe had to transition from being a South Carolina nonprofit corporation, which was its legal status during the entirety of the claim, to now being a sovereign government with responsibilities and resources. And it was not easy. I applaud the people who were on the executive committee and the tribal members for sticking with it and getting the job done. The tribe is prospering, not as well as it should, because of continuing opposition and competition from the state of South Carolina. I am not optimistic, given the government we have in Washington, Biden appointed the first native to ever be the Secretary of the Department of the Interior. Republicans always appoint white former governors from Western states because their first goal is to rape the land and screw the tribes. And when Deb Haaland got there, she was from Laguna Pueblo, south and west of where my place is in New Mexico. She was the first person to ever have an instinct to deal with tribes as sovereign governments and tribal people as people who deserve respect. I couldn't tell you who the head of the Department of Agriculture is today. Why? I mean, why would we worry about what?
I'm sorry.
Why do we worry about these things? Because to have tribal prosperity, you need an educated population. The Trump administration has just closed 2 native colleges, one in the Midwest and one in New Mexico, because they have turned the government over to a fascist lunatic and his orange sidekick to bludgeon the Constitution into submission. And if we don't get some spine by the people in Congress, I'm not sure where we're going to end up. We might all end up being treated like natives. And I think that's totally unacceptable. So that's my rant for the day.
Here, here.
Sit there and take questions, Jake.
Questions?
And I want to.
Wait a minute, I don't do it that way.
Bender's using some arcane legal language here, so forgive him for some of that.
I refer to it as technical legal language. Oh, I had a client one time who told me I shouldn't cuss when I talk to reporters. I said, if I didn't cuss, they wouldn't know it was me. So if it offends your sensibilities, so fucking what? Okay, fire away. Who has a question?
I have a question.
Wait a minute, I want a real question.
Okay.
All right, Jim.
Jay, what happened to that super bingo that they used to do up in Rock Hill?
It went away because the shady bingo operators got on par with their prize, and then the state killed it with the lottery. So once the lottery came along, bingo went away.
They tried to move it to Myrtle Beach. They got opposition from the boat that goes 3 miles out and gambles, right? So that
No, the opposition in Myrtle Beach came from 2 members of Horry County Council who own bingo parlors. So-
This place.
And the state of South Carolina would not intervene to assist the tribe in that regard. So then we came up with the plan to have and I call it a casino. It was all electronic bingo. There was no casino like you would see if you went to Las Vegas, but it would look like it. There'd be lights and bells and whistles and stuff. Now Ernie tells me he's been up to the new Two Kings casino in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. Yet that casino could be in South Carolina, and it could be helping South Carolinians get jobs, and it could be pumping money into the South Carolina economy, but for the continuing blatant racism of the Klan that runs South Carolina to this day. I've been referring to South Carolina as South Klanistan. But
Write that down.
people might find that offensive. I find it accurate. Yes, sir.
Go back to the 2,000 acres becoming 144,000 acres. What counties and what happened to the white folks that were living there?
No, it was 144,000 acres to start with.
Right?
And then the Europeans couldn't take no for an answer. And they intruded on the 144,000 acres almost from the time that reservation was
Most of
created.
modern times, I'm wondering what the acreage is that is in the final settlement of the Catawba Reservation, and what happened to the white folks and what counties is that?
Well, the 144,000 acres was in York, Lancaster, and Chester counties. After the settlement, no person was dispossessed from land. All land that came into the tribe to be taken into trust status came in by a sale,
A sale.
by sale.
But how many, this is, the people left, they moved off the land they owned. How many white people did that affect? I've never heard that.
I don't know the answer to that. Probably not many, because a lot of what came in was farmland. Chris may have a
So
better.
there, in essence, there were liens on the property. You couldn't sell by or borrow money. But instead of getting that land back, they got a $50 million settlement instead that
Divided into several,
John Spratt and.
yeah, divided into several trust funds for education, healthcare, land acquisition. I mean, it wasn't, and some cash payout to tribal members, but it wasn't $50 million they got to put in their pocket. And the lawyers got some of it.
And Mr. Carson what was his position in the state government?
Who? Oh,
Carson.
Crawford Clarkson. He was the head of the Department of Revenue, the State Department of Revenue, and he was appointed by Carroll Campbell to be his chief negotiator, which was wonderful. Had he appointed his lawyer, Mark Elam, we'd have never had it settled, and Mark might have been killed by me. If not first by John Spratt. We would have a meeting. We negotiated this over the course of time, and we got to the point where we were getting down to the specifics, page by page. And Spratt was an early adopter of computer technology. And we were meeting in the federal courtroom in the old post office in downtown Rock Hill, and John had an office upstairs. So we would hammer out terms, and John would go upstairs and he would type it out and bring it back, and we would look at it and say, yeah, this is what we meant, and so on. Well, they told me that every time they got up there, Mark Elam, who hadn't opened his mouth in the meeting, would go up to the stair. We can't do that. We can't do that. You know, just get his Klan robe on. Say, you know, we can't do that. They ignored him, and we got it done. But it was fascinating.
What is the size of the Catawba Reservation now?
They just added some, I understand. I don't know. Chris may have a better feel for it.
I think it's like 1,500. They did just get a new piece.
It's how much?
1,500 acres. But don't quote me on that. I think it's roughly that.
Yeah, it's
So,
Yeah.
Great presentation. I've got some roots in New Mexico too. My mom and dad lived there and
Como stop.
have nephews that live there now. I just passed through. I don't know if this is a question. It's a comment, an observation. And it may be offensive to some, but I don't give a rip. One, as I said the last time, I grew up watching Westerns, and if you go back and watch some of those old Westerns like Gunsmoke and High Chaparral and the Big Valley, the things that they were talking about then are going on right now. The racism, and I was a kid watching the horses and just, you know, enjoying that stuff. But there was a message to those Westerns. Go back and watch some of them.
Oh, I think white supremacy has
Yeah.
been official government policy.
Yeah,
We were all taught in school manifest destiny.
yeah,
Well, you know what that means?
Yeah.
Genocide.
yeah.
But you know, it's been hailed to the whites as a wonderful thing.
So the Indians have said white man speaks with a forked tongue, and you called your community out. Great thing. But I want to know, what is it going to take to get the rest of the world of white men to understand that their responsibility is not to dominate over everyone that they come across and ruin everything, but instead of trying to be a melting pot, why are we not a mosaic? If God is the father, mother, brother, sister of all of us, why don't we all act like that instead of trying to put one, yeah.
We'll take that as a
If I knew
compliment.
the answer to that question, Kamala Harris would be president, and we would be making
We get ready to
progress.
end the world.
But we have been indoctrinated since our earliest education that white people, white men make the right decisions. If you want to see an exercise in irony, go to Washington to the Museum of Native American History. Whoever was a curator of that was a genius. It's organized around treaties between the federal government and the tribes, and it points out that every one of them was breached by the federal government. So that has been our history. So
Chris, you see any hands? up
Yeah,
front?
so we have a couple of questions in the chat. I'm gonna read them now, but if the people in the chat would prefer to answer or ask their questions themselves, they can digitally raise their hand and we'll call on you to ask your questions verbally. But we had two questions. First one is from Cecil Rigby. And Cecil says, as a sovereign nation, does or can the Catawba Nation have a foreign trade zone status? And he follows that with
Interesting.
what would such a status help its financial position? So we'll go on to that and then I'll ask the second question afterward.
that's an interesting question. There was an effort by the tribe to attract Mercedes to come to South Carolina. And we put together a package that would have obtained land that would have been taken into trust status just off of I-77 at US Highway 901, I think it was, maybe 9. And there was a rail siding there. It was owned by the Close family, the Springs Mills family, and they were willing to let the tribe have the property and get the federal government to take it into trust status. And the tribe was contacted by Deutsche Bank, which is a major shareholder in Mercedes, and it was interested in doing this because it could have gotten favorable tax status and favorable interest on loans to build an auto plant in York County just off of I-77. So a couple of members of the executive committee and I came down to the Commerce Department to make a presentation on this project. Mind you, it's Mercedes asking the state of South Carolina and asking the tribe to put together a package that would get the Mercedes plant here. And we were told, no, Carroll Campbell had promised the next auto plant in South Carolina to Charleston. If you drive I-20 west of here, over by Birmingham, you will notice a very large Mercedes plant. That could have been in South Carolina, but for Carroll Campbell.
That plant would have been Union, I betcha, if it had been on sovereign land. And Mercedes has no problems with union workers. Carroll Campbell does.
Well,
That's just a sub-story there.
well, South Carolina's been, the official government policy in South Carolina has been anti-employee since slavery, so we should not be surprised. But because Catawba's settlement required specific terms in the federal legislation, I could not tell you if it could have a foreign trade zone, but I think there is a possibility, and we tried like hell to get one.
Okay, moving on to Bernadette Hampton's question. This was in response to the gentleman who asked the question here in Grove. James, yes. And so Bernadette says, I agree with the last comment. Why is the same playbook to suppress cultures and steal property still successful in the 20th century?
What?
And then that was seconded and said, exactly why? So very upsetting.
Brainwashing.
Gee,
We've been brainwashed since our earliest days in school that white supremacy is normal and a good thing.
It's almost just like chasing of perfection, and then that just influences everything. Because perfection is at the core of white supremacy. I mean, if you think about it.
Well,
And there.
But at the end of 16 classes of the Modjeska school, you will know that the powers that be make the rules for their favor and perpetuation. That's the answer. And the white guys, as you'll learn, the rich guys started parties, didn't listen to George Washington. Corporations now have lifespans that don't end. That was and neither one of those things, parties or corporations, are in the Constitution, and the founding fathers warned us against them. Follow it out 200 years, and here we are.
And this notion of corporations being humans, I love the bumper sticker. I believe corporations are human when Texas executes one.
Indeed.
But that whole notion came because of a corrupt United States Supreme Court. We think the Supreme Court we have now with the Trump 6 is the most corrupt in our history. But I think when the railroad barons owned the Supreme Court, it may have been even more corrupt.
1856,
Probably. In
the
there.
Santa Clara Railroad
Yep.
case, yeah. We'll get onto that in 1850s.
And so we have one last question in the chat. Annette Bethel asks, can you speak on the doctrine of discovery?
The doctrine of
Discovery?
Lord.
Okay, here's my understanding of the doctrine of discovery. Who were the great powers during the Great Exploration? The British, the Spanish, and the Portuguese. And they carved up the world, just like at the Malta Conference at the end of World War II, Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt carved up the world. Just like Trump is trying to carve up the world now, involving Putin, Xi, and Saudi Arabia, whoever runs Saudi Arabia. So that's the doctrine of discovery, is these three countries during the era of global exploration gave land title to the people who showed up, even though there were such civilizations there already.
Like the Palestinians.
I've heard of that. All right, what else you got? Lily, I'm sorry I've taken all of your time.
We have a question over here.
One last thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can a sovereign tribe establish an embassy in, say, Spain or something?
Interesting question. I
Not
think,
related to the whole foreign trade.
yeah, I would think not, but that's an area I've never explored. It's interesting on tribal sovereignty, the United States Supreme Court, in a decision written by Gorsuch, said that criminal jurisdiction in eastern Oklahoma belonged to a tribe under a treaty with the United States. As far as I could tell, that's one of the first times the United States Supreme Court has wholeheartedly sided with the tribe since about 1830. And it has gotten a lot of people in Oklahoma excited. Some think it's a good thing, some think it's, oh shit. But the sovereignty is limited. It's not, I mean, well, can the United States create an embassy anywhere it wants? Well, in theory, it does that by treaty. And in theory, if you don't have an entirely supplicant majority in the Senate would get to consider the treaty. But given the current makeup of the majority in the United States Senate, if Trump decided he wanted an embassy anywhere, he would put it there and tell them, and they'd say, yes, massa, yes, massa. So that's how that would, Jim understands that language. We've been talking about it for years, right? Right. I love the tolerance you guys have for this crazy old white guy standing up or saying bad shit about government. That has been my career. That's how I've ended up representing guys like Brent Percy.
Never paid him either. That's probably why.
Well,
Oh.
well, I got something out of you today. I got a cup of tea when I came in. Now,
That's $2, dude.
I put $2 in the basket for you. I've known you a long goddamn time. All right. Is it Gabby?
Yes,
All right. Have you given Brett his present?
I haven't.
Give him his present. He gave away. I thought you brought it in earlier.
Took it back.
We didn't
Took it
want,
back.
we didn't want to ruin the surprise.
Oh,
I fear it's a pie in my face.
nobody
While
wasted,
Gabby's out, let's.
nobody
take
wasted
that.
pie. Now, Brett gave something away today, so he is now getting something.
reciprocal.
Yeah, Josh and I found this at the thrift store a while ago, and we saw it and said Brett has to have it. And it says, "I survived Jay Bender."
Oh, wow. A vendor cost. A vendor
I don't know who to thank or blame.
I gave those to my classes at the university. So I survived Jay Bender's media law class, USC. I can't believe a student of mine actually put it in a thrift store.
I can't believe you actually paid 99 cents.
If it's not too late, that grade's gonna be changed.
Thank you, Derek. Good show, lad. Good show.
I wish you wouldn't have held back so much. Well, tell the true story.
Wife tells me I have to be more circumspect because she's out of town.
Excellent. Thank you, Jay. All right, next up, we have Lilly Little Water. She is the CEO of the South Carolina Indian Affairs Commission, which is a nonprofit organization that works with all the tribes in South Carolina. Lakota. She's going to tell us her exact designation. Started in her teenage years, really becoming an activist for Native American people, and has worked really hard, well over 30 years here in South Carolina, working on a wide variety of issues. And a lot of the chiefs she deals with are sort of chauvinistic men. And she does a really good job of navigating the nuances of all of that, which tells you that she's a very tough person. And many of the issues that T works with are women's issues, and with being Women's History Month, I think that's appropriate. But please give a big hand for Lilly Little Water.
First of all, thank you all for having me back. So everybody do me a huge favor. It's late in the afternoon. We've been listening to a lot of people and digesting a lot of information. So either stand up and shake your arms, or put your hands up in the air and shake your arms and get your circulation going a little bit. If you want to get some water, whatever you need to do, because honestly, when you don't have circulation to your brain, you're not listening to me. So also thank you for having my dog. I was in Yemassee, South Carolina for the weekend, and I did not have time to bring her home on my way back. So she is very well trained. She will not bother any of you, but she might walk around a little bit while I talk, because she might not want to stay in one place while I'm up here. So in Petuaste, pay Modjeska Chikalamini, pay Minikanju Achedi Sakon. So what I just said was, my name is Lilly Little Water. I am Minikanju Achedi Sakon. Achedi Sakon is 7 allied tribes, which a lot of people like to call the Sioux, but that is a French word. We don't use it. We are the Achedi Sakon, and my band is Minikanju. We are often called the Lakota because that means ally, and we are all 7 tribes are allied together. So that's where that came from. I am in South Carolina because my father is from South Carolina. He is from St. Helena Island, and he retired here from the military. I'm a military brat, and I am also of the Celtic tribe of Ireland, and very proud of my fact that I have dual citizenship. My grandparents are from Dunfanny Island, Ireland, before they came here. So nothing wrong with that. And as a matter of fact, we have been studying a lot about my Irish family, and we are from the Pict tribe. So we are kind of tribal people on both sides. So as Chris said, I am the Chief Executive Officer of the South Carolina Indian Affairs Commission. This came about in about 1989. It actually started in 1985. And about 1989, I got a phone call from then Chief Gilbert Blue of the Catawba. This is before the Catawba were federally recognized. And so he said, "I'm not a very organized person. I hear you are. Can you come and help me out? Can you take some notes? Can you put together material for me?" That kind of thing. And I said, "Well, sure." So I ended up from there doing all different things. I was the secretary for the South Carolina Indian Affairs Commission for 12 years. Then I was the executive director, and now I'm in the position that I am in now. And I am going to use my phone a lot because I was telling Chris earlier, I'm not a public speaker. I'm a worker bee. I come here and do this because I respect the mission of the school. I respect Brett and all that he's done, and I respect Chris, of course, but I've also known Chris since I was in college. So if he calls and asks me to do something, I'm always going to say yes. So if you forgive me for using my phone for notes, I appreciate it. As I've gotten older, I need two things, these and notes. So does anybody know what the recognized tribes in South Carolina, who they are? Are you familiar with that? I think that's one of the most important things that you learn today, if anything, is please remember who these tribes are. So as we've been talking about most of the day, we do have a federally recognized tribe, which is the Catawba. And I think Jay did a good job of explaining what the difference is between a federally recognized and a state recognized tribe is. But just to kind of simplify that, federally recognized tribe has government to government relationships with their tribal government and the federal government. Easy enough. State recognized tribe has a state to state recognition. I mean, state to state relation with the state government and their tribal government. So our state recognized tribes are the Beaver Creek Indians, the Edison-Nastas Cuso tribe of South Carolina, the Petey Nation of Upper South Carolina, the Petey Nation tribe of South Carolina, the Piedmont American Indian Association Lower Eastern Cherokee Nation of South Carolina, the Santee Indian tribe, the Sumter Band of Chirac Indians, the Waccamaw Indian people, and the Wasamasa tribe of Varnatown Indians. This is very easy for you to find later if you want to research this. So I think it's very important that everybody remembers this as I speak.
Not Lumbee.
No, Lumbee are in North Carolina. Now, there are a great many people that we call intertribal, which are people like me. I'm not a South Carolina Native American. I'm a Native American, but my tribe is not in the state of South Carolina, so that's called intertribal. Yes, we do have a large Lumbee population and a lot of other populations, but these are the state recognized tribes. There are of course, other Native Americans in South Carolina. So a lot of people today have been talking to you about all the things that have happened earlier in history and some contemporary history of Catawba. So what I'm going to talk to you about are the things that are going on contemporarily on my side of the fence and a kind of more or less our view of what is happening. So I think it's really important to look at us as not historical figures. And I think that's one of the biggest problems. We have a saying right now that's on all of our t-shirts, it's on our coffee mugs, it's everywhere. It's strong, resilient, indigenous. So I'm going to take that resilient word. She loves everybody, so anybody is welcome to hold her. Just don't walk out with her if you can help it. Resilience isn't just survival. And I think I have so many people say to me, oh, your people are so resilient. I just respect so much the way that they have survived. Okay, thanks. But it's also liberational. So how do we do that? How do we make that survival liberational? Because it's really a big deal right now in Indian country because we're doing something that is called decolonizing ourselves. And that is literally, we are deprogramming ourselves from what we have learned from being colonized. That programming began very early on with Christianization, are you all familiar with the Indian residential schools? Okay. So to have to explain that part, that's good. I'm glad that you guys are familiar with that. So what we're having to do is really have to relearn who we are. Even though most of us have a good sense of it, we have been cut off from it for so long that we have to teach ourselves what all of this means. Say I'm Native American, I have a tribe, I literally go to ceremonies, but what we have found is over the course of generations, those ceremonies and our culture have been corrupted by colonization. And that didn't happen in 1492. That didn't happen during the Indian Wars. That didn't happen during any of the historical periods that you would think. That happened because we ourselves became so disconnected because of those things. So we have to take responsibility for this ourselves. We were talking earlier, when does this all stop? It stops when we start believing our oppressors, when we stop taking on the responsibility for our own selves and our own belief systems and our own cultures and saying, no, we are not going to accept you taking minerals from our land. We are not going to accept you disrespecting our sovereignty. We are not going to put up with this anymore. How we do that, that's a long road. And Jay just described how long one road was for one tribe. There are 643 federally recognized tribes. There are probably 200 who have applied for federal recognition. And there are some who don't give a rip, because why would I want a government to recognize me? So you also have to respect that. So as I said, we're deprogramming ourselves. I kind of try to give you some example of these things. It's a bit hard to describe. So what have we learned from dominant society about our relationship to the earth? That we have dominion over it as human beings. So I'll tell you a little story from my culture. And I also want to say, I can't speak for every Native American on this, in this country, or every indigenous person on the earth. That is completely unfair to them. All of our cultures are completely different. Our spiritualities are completely different. And even our treaties with the government are different. We don't all have the same treaties with the government. And that's why Indian law is so very complex, just like you were hearing about. So this little story that I was actually taught when I was a little kid is one of the first things that we learn in our tribe. And you will be asked, and I'm going to ask all of you this: can the earth survive without plants and trees?
No.
Okay. Can the earth survive without insects and animals? No. Okay. Can the earth survive without us?
Yes.
Yes.
So are we the most important things on earth?
No.
No. So we don't have dominion over anything. So we've had to go back and literally kind of reteach ourselves, because we grow up around people and we encounter other spiritualities that tells us that we do. And this is from a time we're little tiny children, and residential schools told our grandparents and our parents this. And so younger Native folks have started saying, we've had it, we're not doing this anymore. So we don't have dominion. We do not believe in a hierarchical system or a hierarchical society. They're stratified. We are equal to our brothers and sisters, the foreleg, the wing, insects, and in a little bit, I'm even going to talk about stones, which also have anything that has a life form is literally our equal. They are related to us. We have a saying, Matakiasan, that is with respect to all of our relations. And that means, that's exactly what that means. All of our relations. It's not just two-legged human beings. So relearning these kinds of things is one thing, but actually activating on them, that is where the deprogramming comes in. It's one thing to know it. It's another thing to start living it. And I think that we saw that, if you're all familiar with what happened at Standing Rock, And that is because we literally all came together as tribes and decided that we were going to live that, and we were going to protect the water, which is the blood of the earth. And because we do not have dominion over it, it is sacred in and of itself. It has a right to be what it is, despite the fact that that was 33% of this country's drinking water that could be contaminated by building a pipeline underneath it. That is the Oglala Aquifer. So that leads me to another thing, is decolonization also has to do with the revitalization of our language. Our language is our culture. We lose our language, and that is probably one of the most devastating things that can happen to us. I'll give you an example. I have a lot of people that'll say, oh, I speak some words in your language, which I think is great. I'm not trying to diminish anyone who is interested in learning or cares at all. But the problem here is that if you look in a Lakota dictionary that some Jesuit made during the 1800s, sometimes I look at it and I kind of laugh. And also too, sometimes I actually look at it because some elder can't tell me what the name for something is, and I have to go refer to that dictionary, and then I feel kind of bad, but we do what we do. Winyan is the word for woman. So if you look in that dictionary, it says Winyan woman, or if you look at woman, there it is. But is that really what it is?
Wait, say that loud.
Winyan.
Like Winyan Bay, South Carolina?
No, Winyan.
Winyan.
Yeah. So we means the sun. And the sun is a concept for the beginning of time. Inyan is the first spirit of all time, which are the stones. They are the bones of the earth. So a word does not just mean woman. It is literally a concept that a person who is a woman has been the bedrock since the beginning of time. So language revitalization is so important because it's not just the word. As you can see, my culture is built on layer upon layer upon layer of concepts that form values and spirituality. And without that language, the whole foundation is gone. So a Lakota child can take that dictionary and say, oh, I know the word for woman, it's Winyan. But knowing the word, just the word, that's not what it's about at all. So also too, I think that just as Jay was talking about, we're also reclaiming by decolonizing self-determination and sovereignty. We're supposed to be guaranteed sovereignty by the supremacy law and the Constitution. But right now, especially, you can see what a crock of shit the Constitution is becoming. And unfortunately, and I'm like, Jay, I cuss a lot, sorry. But you also need to realize that, this just didn't begin. Our constitutional rights have been violated more times than I can count. So many treaties have been broken that, again, and I'm telling people right now that the way that you are feeling is the way we have been feeling for centuries.
Wow.
So if you want to sit here and say, oh, I can't do this, or this is too much, or I'm overwhelmed, or I'm going to sit this one out because it takes too much emotional energy. I don't accept that. No, you have more fight in you than you realize. When this happened to you for 500 years, come back, talk to me. Yes, you can do this. Another thing about decolonization, and this is something that I'm going to talk about a little bit in depth, is justice, is reformative justice. And we're all very familiar with that term. But what does that mean for my people? It means a lot of things, more things that I would have time to talk to you about today. We have a movement called Land Back. I don't know if you guys have heard of this movement, but right now Land Back means that whenever there is a chance for us to get a piece of dirt back, we're going to get it. It has also to do with, it's not like we want the whole country back, give us all this land, you took it, that's not what we're talking about, but there are ways in which land can be given back. Federal park systems had begun to now work with native tribes, and using their concepts of how to fight fires, how to, preserve the particular plants and things that they are familiar with in the parks, because this is their whole culture. So that's part of land back, and there's a great deal of movement on that. I don't know how much that's going to keep happening right now. Probably for the next 4 years, it's going to be put on hold, but doesn't mean that it can't happen at all. We've had bad presidents before. We get this. Also, too, voter suppression is a problem. The last administration, and this keeps happening, they'll say, unless you have a physical address, you can't get a voter registration card. Well, most of my folks, and it can't be a P.O. box, where my mom is from, they all have P.O. boxes, and some of them don't even have those. They use somebody else's P.O. box. They don't care. The mail is 40 miles away. So send one person, go get it out of one box. We don't care. We don't get that much mail anyway. So we don't have physical addresses. So they had figured now that tribes, we can throw elections. That kind of happened during the Biden administration in Wisconsin. That had a lot to do with the tribes in Wisconsin and Michigan. So, suppressing that vote right now has become very important. And then, as Chris mentioned, I'm especially going to talk today about some women's issues that have to do with reformative justice, and specifically in South Carolina, because this is just extremely important for our allies to know. And that is the issue of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking, which kind of all falls under an umbrella, missing and murdered Indigenous women, two-spirits, and girls, and human trafficking. So we do 2 surveys a year with the University of South Carolina School of Social Work. And we make sure that we do not touch those surveys. They are professionally done so that they are not biased. We're not getting the answers that we want. We're getting the answers that maybe we need, so that we use those surveys to find out what the problems are with Native Americans in South Carolina are, so that we can resolve them, or at least begin to make a plan to address them. So the first 2 that we did, and we knew that we had a problem, we just didn't know the gravity of it. We found that 83% and 84% of Native American women had either been sexually assaulted or were survivors of domestic violence. So that's pretty much all of us. So now we have programs in the within the Indian Affairs Commission, South Carolina Indian Affairs Commission, under a committee that we have called the Indigenous Women's Alliance, to address those things. And it is all, fortunately, culturally appropriate, and that's something else that we desperately needed. So we're going to talk right now about missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirits. And I'm going to add to this that nationally, statistics are finding that Native American boys are the most sex trafficked and labor trafficked now. And I think you all can, I don't have to tell all of you, you're smart enough to know why women are so vulnerable in minority communities. This is nothing, I don't think this is anything new to you. We did a particular survey because we saw social media, Facebook, this map starts going around between all the tribes, and it's made by Anonymous, and it has all these red blobs on it, and these red blobs say, this is where the biggest problems are with missing and murdered Indigenous women. Well, it covers these blobs, covering the whole United States and Canada. And I notice right here on the border of North and South Carolina, there's a big red blob. And we're looking at it, we're going, okay, well, that's where the Catawba are. And that's where the Lower Eastern Cherokee are in the upstate. So maybe we need to start taking this very, very seriously because this is a scary looking red blob. So we asked the school social work to please do a survey on this particular subject. And the results of that survey were that 43% of Native American families in South Carolina had an immediate, this is like mother, grandmother, aunts, uncles, etc., missing or murdered female family member. That's almost half of us, which was, you expect things to be bad, but sometimes when you look at how bad, it's very scary. So we immediately knew we had to do something. I didn't really quite know how to address this. So we decided we would get some help. We asked the Minnesota Women's Native American Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Coalition to come down and work with us because they had been doing some phenomenal work. Governor Tim Walsh actually gave them an office in his government to function and try to help resolve this issue because it's about an area where they are. So we had a summit on missing and murdered Indigenous women. And what we did from there was we formed our own task force on missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two spirits. And now we call it missing and murdered Indigenous women and relatives because we are having to combine boys in with this particular situation as well, and some young men. What we are doing right now is a huge scope of work. All of our committees on the South Carolina Indian Affairs Commission have huge scopes of work. There's no doubt about that. But this one, particularly large, because we did not realize how many facets we were going to have to hit to do this. So the first thing that we decided to do was we have been working with the Attorney General's Office on Human Trafficking since its inception. We decided to develop culturally relevant awareness and prevention on human trafficking for tribes and do training with them in each tribal area. The next thing that we decided to do was develop, and this is really hard to describe because God forbid if it's ever happened to you, it sounds heartless, but we had to literally develop a guidebook for families and for tribal leaders on what to do if you have a missing or murdered tribal member. Because it branches off, the missing and the murdered part will branch off. But sometimes the very beginning of it is very, very similar. Like, what happens when I call the police? What happens? This is all very, very sensitive because the first 2 hours and sometimes just the first 30 minutes of what you do can determine that person's life or death. What clothes do they have on? What clothes did they have on when they were missing? We wanted to literally put something on paper that every tribal member could have in their house. We wanted to put something online, and we're working on that part right now. Where actually anyone, not just tribal members, anyone can, in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning, if you have a missing child or a missing person in your family, you can look at this and say, this is are things that I can use. These are tools. It's sad we have to even have these tools, but we do. We had to make a glossary of legal terms, a glossary of medical terms, a glossary of forensic terms, because when you're in crisis, the way that the police, the legal system, the coroner, the way that they talk to you, you don't hear this language. You can't decipher it in that minute. You are just covered in grief and terror at the time, whether someone is missing or is possibly gone. So it's very, very difficult for families to negotiate this. We wanted to make sure our families just had the best chance they could with whatever tools we could supply to them to try to get through the situation. We also have, and this is another thing, most forums in South Carolina where I just had a flu shot this past year, and I always look on the forums. And if you do me a favor, when you're ever looking at a forum, look on there for me too. White, Black, Asian, Hispanic, other. There is no box to check for me. Coroner's forms, police forms, you're other. So if there's a Jane Doe, most of the coroners don't even know, one, how to identify if this is a Native American body. Two, that there are all of these tribes in the state that have contact numbers they can call and ask, is this maybe one of your tribal members? And the last but not least, there's just nothing that identifies that person particularly as a Native American because their school records might not show that even if they find them. It's a really complicated situation. So what we've had to do is start working with coroners. We've been very, very lucky that the coroner in Richland County and her forensic folks have been incredibly cooperative and incredibly kind and very, very respectful about the fact that this is happening. As a matter of fact, they took us and showed us their computer system, which we weren't particularly supposed to see, where they go into a federal system that has like all of the Jane Does in the United States. And I said, okay, so how many are Native American? And they like filtered it and they said there was 435. There are 6,000 missing Native American women in my seven tribal system alone. So how could there only be 425 when then there's this many of us missing? It didn't even make sense. So what that is probably misidentification of bodies. So the coroners of South Carolina are rather stubborn. We're going back to the white supremacy thing again a lot of the time. They think they know what they know. They don't want to be taught anything else. So it's been kind of a little bit of a difficult road trying to get them to work with us. We've been going to their conventions and their meetings and things like that and handing out written material. A lot of times you'll just find that in the floor or on the tables. We gave it to them and don't walk out with it. So it takes a personal relationship. So how in the world we're going to figure out how to do that, we're still working on. Also, we're doing a lot of work with tribes on getting to know and have a relationship with law enforcement in their area, because a lot of the law enforcement officers in tribal areas don't even know there's a tribe there. We were kind of surprised. We call like the district offices and things like that, and they say, "What tribe? What's a Wasamasa? Wasamasa what?" They don't even know. And police officers we know have their hands full, but at the same time, there's got to be a better relationship there. So we're trying to encourage that and go through a program that helps that along. So that is just one example of what my organization does. That's just one example of the issues Native Americans face in South Carolina. There are many, many, many more, no doubt about it. But I think the most important thing to remember is that we are still here and we're taking responsibility for ourselves and we are fighting for ourselves. This is the days of being pushed around are long past. I watched people several years ago be bitten by dogs, maced, tear gassed, hit, rubber bullets, nobody backed down. It's just not going to happen anymore. So I think you're going to expect to hear from us a lot. You're going to expect to see us a lot. And we'd really appreciate it anytime possible if you would ally with us. And by doing that, I think you all are also smart enough to know that allying with us doesn't mean telling us what our issues are or telling us how to address them. It means you'll help us do that the way that we see fit. And that is always most appreciated. So I'm going to stop talking because I think I've said enough. And if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to take them. Again, thank you for putting out with the dog. You had your hand up first. I'll try to go in order.
So I don't have a good sense for like what, in terms of the United States of America, like how big is the native population compared to the rest of us who come here from other places? And is that population growing or is it shrinking?
It's growing. There's about 5.6 million of us, and it is growing. That's why I said we can overflow and we can overthrow an election.
Yeah.
Plus, in states where you have electoral representation, we can also do that the same way. So, Chris, am I right? Is that where we are now?
Sounds right.
I have to ask the white guy. I can say that to him because he's my friend. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I have a question from the chat. Kate Landishaw asked, what's the missing murdered women online tool? Like, where can we access the tools or get in connection with the work that y'all do?
Okay, that's a really good question, and we don't have that up yet. We
Okay.
are building that right now. We have been working on this for about 2 years, and like I said, there's so many different facets that we're busy working through it. And as a matter of fact, we do have allies on this particular task force.
Okay.
So if they're interested in that, they absolutely can email scIndianAffairsCommission@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook, and anybody can contact us there, or they can also contact me if they would like. I can leave my contact information here.
That would be great.
And that's a really good question because we're really anxious to get that up there. We've had a lot of tribal members ask us the same thing, and we are always very disappointed to have to say we don't have that done yet. So, yeah, we're busy writing that right now. We have a professional editor that's going through it with us because there's just so much material. Yes, ma'am.
Who would a person call if, say, a member of their family were missing? How do they connect with law enforcement? How does that work?
And the really horrible thing about this is it differs county by county.
Yeah.
So, if someone in their family is missing, you would just call the local police, and then they have a protocol they go through.
So they do not have their own law enforcement on any of the nations? Or
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. They absolutely do. Now, that can be very convoluted as far as state and federal law go. All right, so there is a Violence Against Women Act. And interestingly enough, this is something that Joe Biden developed and pushed through way back early in his career. Trump refused to renew it during his first presidency, and then it was reinstated. So the Violence Against Women Act says that tribes there's some jurisdiction because there's an issue here, and this is one of the biggest problems, and I'm glad you brought that up. Nationally, one of the biggest problems is reservation-wise, who has jurisdiction legally, even if you have your own court system and your own police. The Catawba have their own police and their own court system, and they're developing a lot of other things in their legal system. The Waccamaw are state recognized, and they have their own tribal police and their own magistrates that are recognized by the state. But when someone commits, and this is why this is so easy for predators, and one thing I forgot to bring up is that the vast majority of women who are survivors of these things, it is non-native men. We do not follow the statistics that most of this intimate violence situations do, where it's someone this is someone they don't know. This is non-native men that they do not know. And why this is so easy for predators, even with children, is because crimes committed on our land, we can't prosecute sometimes, but yet because it's committed on our land, then it's not illegal outside of it. So it gets very fuzzy there. And the Violence Against Women Act tried to address some of this. And as a matter of fact, the jurisdiction and the ability to legally prosecute was widened under Biden's administration to help with this some. Deborah Holland had a lot to do with that as well. So but it's still a problem. It's not a perfect system. So that is the reason why, again, this is a
And
problem.
if there's
across the
that
United
urgency,
States.
you know, to act as quickly as possible.
There is not.
Um,
I hate to tell you this, but there is not even a good system when your family member is missing or is murdered. Yes.
I have another question from the chat. So, Annette Bethel wants to know, do you have a seed saving program?
Have a what?
A seeds saving program?
I don't know what that is, and I apologize.
It's basically are harvesting your seeds and just keeping them when you grow. I know that I garden and I get some of my seeds from Native Seed Search in Arizona, where they're working to preserve various varieties that have been cultivated by the Native American communities in Arizona.
That's amazing. I like that. We do not in our organization. Now, what tribes are doing as far as that goes, I don't know because I'm not involved in that particular aspect. We mostly right now, conservationally, the commission is involved. We have another group, committee called Idle No More South Carolina, which is an environmental justice committee. They are mostly involved right now with water pollution and PFAS. So, because they're so honestly, our committees are not a lot, there's not a lot of us, so there's not a lot of people. So we have to take like one kind of issue at a time and, you know, get through it. And we have to have so many competing priorities also. But I do know that amongst my own people, I could tell you that, yeah, we definitely do that. We're really particular about where what we plant, and then we do keep our own seeds and things like that. And I believe also too the Catawba, I've seen them do a lot of that just by listening to them talk amongst each other. So, and food sovereignty has become a huge issue. And that's something that we want to start working with the State Museum on, because they're doing a whole series right now on indigenous foodways and a lot of different things about food historically and contemporarily. So yeah, we really want to work with them on food sovereignty. So hopefully we'll get there, but not yet.
A fun fact, the Native Seed Search actually worked with a community, an indigenous community in Mexico, on their food sovereignty. They were horribly affected by droughts and just a couple other things. And this group in particular goes in and tries to help with, you know, in Mexico, in Arizona, and I think a couple states around, with preserving food sovereignty as well. So
that's amazing. I'd love to look at that. Thank you for bringing that up. That's really cool. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I'm really like the idea of the decolonization that you mentioned before and the practice of that, because I think, and a lot of the folks that were here, they agree that that is very much needed in all oppressed and marginalized communities. But it seemed to remind me too that there's something that the Australians did, and this kind of goes back to the white male supremacy kind of thing. When they took out the indigenous populations and of the kids and put them in schools and assimilated them and robbed them of their culture. There are movies, you know, fictional movies, but also documentaries about this. And it just impresses me how consistent, you know, colonizers are in the methods that they use in order to overtake and to oppress people. That I don't know, what book are they using?
Yeah.
You know, that is so consistent all over the globe.
I hate to say it, but
The Bible.
I didn't want to say exactly that, but one thing I was going to say, Westernization and Christianization, definitely. Yeah, those concepts come from there. We're still very, very Romanized. Yeah, so very, very Romanized society. So, yeah.
We have one more question in the chat unless someone has a question in the room.
I can wait till after the chat question.
Thank you. So Anjanette Hart asked, she says, you just spoke of serving as an ally. Why do you think there is such a divide between the natives and now we are called African Americans, but I am learning more to identify as African descent?
I didn't understand that question, so I apologize.
I'm thinking she is asking, why is there such a divide between, I actually am not sure. Anjanette, can you come off mute and clarify your question for us?
Yeah, so hey everybody. Thank you so much, Miss Lily, for your
Hi.
presentation. And I'm just so amazed that, everything that, you have accomplished and simply the native people have accomplished. And just listening to you at the end, you stated, for us to ally together, to serve together. All in all of this is about human rights for all of us. But I do, and I'm learning a lot, but I do that one of the things that I've noticed and experienced is just certain divides between Native Americans and African Americans. I mean, because that's what we're called right now. Um, so and that's just in general. Maybe you don't have an answer to that, but I would love to just hear your perspective. We're kind of pushed away. I went and served in Arizona. Um, I did a contract, and some of the things that I experienced, I'm just gonna say, just in general, because I don't want to go into detail. As an African American, it wasn't fun. And not that I want to say fun. I know what word I'm looking for, but here I was coming to serve because they needed my expertise in an area, and this is where I was hired, and I was more than willing to serve. Okay, but there were certain things that happened. Um, and I'm just saying, like, that wasn't the first time that I've noticed that. Even over the years with other people, with the Native Americans and African Americans. So just what do you think your kind of what is your opinion? What is your opinion? That's all I'm asking.
Okay,
Nothing
thanks
more
for
or
the
less.
question. Now I get where you're coming from. So that has less to do with you being African American, I think, than it has to do with just outsiders, period. Especially in that area, or in any really, really highly densely populated native area. And that's something that you kind of have to learn to expect. And I tell you this, my mother is what I would call, I hate using this word, stereotypically Native American looking. She could walk up to you and go, okay, you probably say, oh, she's Native American. Um, she lived in Arizona for 6 years. She did some of the same things. She is in the medical field. She
Yeah.
is a heart diagnostician. She does diagnostics on the human heart. And they went into Native communities, and she was actually with a team of doctors who were Native themselves, who were from the area. And what she found is not one of her patients would speak to her, because they didn't know her.
Okay.
And
Oh wow.
that is the pain. That is what you're seeing, is that wall that we build, that we don't let other people through, because of all the things that we've experienced from outsiders. One thing, trying to Christianize us, trying to tell us how we're supposed to live, trying to tell us how we're supposed to dress, trying to tell us how we're supposed, everything, trying to, it's just, that is a learned behavior. And that probably had absolutely nothing to do with you at all, other than the fact that they don't know you and you're an outsider. And you can't imagine how many people have come to us and said, we're here to serve, we're just here to help you. We get a little resentful, and it's also exhaustion. Come hearing the same thing over and over and over again, with the same terrible results over and over and over and over again, and the same infiltration over and over and over and over again. When I'm in my community, I hate to say this, look at me. I mean, and I will say this, when I'm with my family and we are in Rapid City or somewhere else off of my res, I am the same way. I mean, I get a demeanor and a different posture. My physical being changes. The way I look at people from my eyes, I know that changes because I've had friends tell me that. The same thing happens to me. It's instinctual. It's just, you're scared a lot, in situations where you're being handled by people you don't know, especially if you're vulnerable. And my mother was literally doing diagnostics on people who were extremely sick. and their hearts are failing and they have to have a horrible, huge surgery that they're thinking about. And now they're in the hands of all these people they don't know. And that has happened to them before and it didn't turn out well. So I think maybe that's what was going on. That's my opinion on it. I certainly can't say, but I've experienced that a million times. And like I said, unfortunately, I have taken on the same attitude myself.
And I will add something you learned from the Modjeska school is that that's a part of the playbook. That's a white supremacy gift they pass down, is to divide and conquer. And you'll see that happening on different scales in between different classes throughout history and to now. And so that is one of those like part of the human rights lessons, I think, is learning how to build grace and give time to rebuild that trust.
Yeah, and I would say if you start working with us, and I'll give you a little nugget from even in my own organization, like our I Don't Know More Environmental Justice Committee and our task force on missing and murdered Indigenous women and relatives, we do invite allies in. Now, some of our other committees we don't, because y'all can't help us, to be honest with you. If you could, we would let you know when we needed that kind of help. But I'm almost done. She's telling me to be done. So she might. So you really do want to listen first for a very, very long time. What we have is we have people that will come to work with us and they're very well meaning. And the first thing they'll start saying is, well, you should. And I know, and we could, and why don't you go? Don't do that. You really need to listen and understand that what we are doing, and if we ask your opinion, great, give it. But what you'll find out, if you continue with that kind of behavior, you won't be invited to any more meetings.
If that's it of the questions, I want to
Oh,
make
I have to just speak up. Yeah. I'm sorry. I just want to reply. Yeah, I went there to serve medically as a registered pharmacist. So that was where my lens came from and some of the things that I experienced. So it was similar to what you said about your mother. But then again, you're one of the representatives and leaders right now, and you've done an amazing job. But so you're asking to ally, to help, to come to the meetings and listen. And I'm just saying that sometimes when we do that as African Americans, there is a divide that we're not wanted. We're not wanted to help and serve and listen and learn. We are not. So I'm just saying from my perspective and what I've experienced and what I've seen.
And I'm sorry that happened, truly. I'm not familiar with that, as I've not seen that happen personally. So I apologize that happened to you. That's really all that I can do. I don't know the reason. But because, so many of us are now Afro-Indigenous, that I don't see that divide, because I have, Afro-Indigenous persons in my family. And I guess maybe that's just me.
Before I get to that, I'm going to say something that addresses this, that kind of sums up some of the teachings of the Modjeska School about ethnocentrism, the ethnic centrism that is exacerbated by the white folks who have been in charge since they started writing history. The winners write history. And so it's a human foible, ethnocentrism. Think about it. When you center yourself on your ethnicity, and we lose the unity of all. So once you finish the 16 classes, you can overcome your ethnocentricity, hopefully. And let's hear it for T.
All right, ladies and gents, again, this was our.
And you've got to lift up this next class as the cornerstone of understanding the downfall of this nation. Oh, it's the rise of this state.
Oh, well,
Okay.
On that cheerful note, so give you first off, again, thanks to both our presenters today. This was a great presentation, a great first deep dive. And tomorrow, of course, we have class number 2, which is all about the Goose Creek Men, people who founded the colony of South Carolina, and we're going to explore the early years of South Carolina colony up through Revolutionary War. Next week, we're going to be doing the early years of this place as a state up through the Civil War. And then we'll have our next deep dive on March 23rd with special guest Dr. Justine Hill Edwards, who has written 2 extraordinary books about really the broad relationship between race and capitalism. The first book is Origins of Capitalism in Colonial South Carolina, and her latest book, which I'm particularly excited to talk about, is called Savings and Trust, The Rise and Betrayal of the Freedmen's Bank. That is on Sunday, March 23rd. So as you can see, we've got a pretty exciting slate up the next few weeks. All right. So again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and we'll see most of you tomorrow.
That's it.